Portal to Hell is a horror comedy that takes a ridiculous premise and somehow turns it into something surprisingly heartfelt and meaningful. The film follows Dunn, a private contractor and debt collector whose relatively ordinary life gets completely flipped upside down when a portal to hell opens inside his local laundromat. And yes, this movie is every bit as ridiculous and hilarious as the premise sounds. But what really impressed me about the portal to hell is that it works on two completely different levels. On the surface, this is just a really fun horror comedy. It's heavy on the comedy, lighter on the horror, with witty dialogue and characters that are genuinely entertaining to spend time with. You could probably watch these characters hang out for 90 minutes without the portal to hell and still have a good time. But underneath all of that comedy is a surprisingly heavy character story about trauma and morality. Don is extremely intelligent, organized, and precise, but he struggles to understand social cues and the emotional content of people around him. And suddenly this character is faced with an insane moral dilemma. Someone he considers a friend is going to be dragged to hell, and potentially even worse things could happen unless Dunn sacrifices 3 souls to the portal to hell. So underneath all the jokes and absurdity, the film asks a generally interesting question. What happens when you ask a good person to commit an absolutely terrible act because you've convinced them it's for the greater good? That's where Portal to Hell becomes much more interesting than initially expected. Even the filmmaking itself gives us insights into Dunn. There's a shot of this perfectly organized wall of sticky notes that immediately tells you something about how his mind works. Early montage showing him pouring his coffee, sharpening his pencils, and getting ready for work aren't just there for style. They're establishing his personality for the story really gets moving. And visually, the entire film is vibrant and crisp. There's a clear sense of intention behind how this world and these characters are presented. The score is another highlight because it maintains the personality of the film without overpowering it with more emotional moments. When the story becomes more serious, the music doesn't suddenly scream at you that you're supposed to feel something. It settles back and allows the characters to carry that emotional weight. And that ultimately is why Portal to Hell worked so well for me. It's funny when it needs to be. It's absurd when it needs to be absurd. But underneath everything, there's a genuinely compelling character narrative holding the entire thing together. Portal to Hell isn't merely a horror comedy. It's a funny, weird, surprisingly thoughtful character piece that understands you don't have to sacrifice substance to make something entertaining. And that's what really works so well about this film, because it kind of does play on 2 different levels, and you could have a more depth kind of story, and it also kind of plays as just a fun horror comedy. For my full written review, where we kind of go more deep into the details, check out 4timefilmschool.dropout.com. And as always, if you like listening here and you want to see more movie reviews, go ahead and hit the subscribe button for daily movie reviews.